I don't know what kind.
Hey, you're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy, and I'm not sharing my screen. I'm supposed to be. You're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy, as I said earlier, and it is May 24th. Our special guest today is Lloyd Barnhardt and Mr. David Barksdale. We'll tell you a little bit about them in a minute, but hang tight while we get this show going. Again, Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy is sponsored in part by Blackwell Captive Solutions. They're a medical stopgap insurance company. They help businesses that are self-insured with the healthcare insurance. If your healthcare spend is freaking bigger than almost anything else you have, then you might want to talk to Blackwell Captive Solutions so they can help you figure out what is your healthcare premiums and what are you paying and what should you be paying. Reach out to Blackwell Captive Solutions, blackwellcaptive.com. And tell Carrie and her team that Randy told you to give them a call. Randy, I think I'm good to go as I'm getting ready to introduce myself to everybody. For those who've never met me, as Randy's still banging on the keyboard to get things going and on his side of the game, I'm Teddy Burriss. I'm a LinkedIn strategist, trainer, and coach. I help business professionals figure out how to use LinkedIn as a business tool. I do almost anything with, webinars, seminars, one-on-one coaching, corporate training, but I've actually turned in my sandwich board. I will no longer stand on the street and proselytize about LinkedIn. And I love to help people get the most value they can out of it. Randy, did I get things running for you?
Well, you kind of did. I found us on Facebook, but not LinkedIn.
I'll go check.
Not seen it on your LinkedIn page, because normally I pick it up and share it across mine too.
I'll get LinkedIn up and running, man. Go ahead and tell.
All right. So Randy Wooden with Goodwill Industries of Northwest North Carolina, director for our professional center, and I'm based here in Winston. Have clients all across the fruited plain, but most here in the Triad, of course, as you might expect. We're free, happy to help. And also, I'm also now getting an influx of what I'll call recent college grads. The job market is still pretty strong, but some people are still struggling a little bit, especially trying to get that first job out of college. And so if that's somebody that steer them our way, we're happy to get them on the calendar and see what we can do to try to help them get where they want to go. But every week, Wednesday, high noon, Teddy and I get together, been doing it for a few years now. And we bring in guests to talk about topics of interest, whether it's job hunting, business, professional development, and so forth. So today we're going to learn some stuff about things that I think impact all of us, but we may not really fully understand. And that's the financial stuff that's going on in the news. And there's a lot, whether it's interest rates, inflation, the debt ceiling issue, banks closing, all of that stuff. We're going to cover all that. So we're going to do that. If you have comments or questions for our guests today, put them in the chat box. We'll keep an eye on that. Teddy will do that. But I want to briefly introduce our two guests today, and then have each of you talk a little bit more about your background, sort of what got you to where you are today. But we'll start. David Barksdale is CEO, and we also see the same barber too. So I'll have you know that. He's the CEO of Piedmont Federal Savings Bank. Thank you, David, for joining us. And also Lloyd Barnhardt, who does have the full head of hair, though, Lloyd. And I'm proud. Lloyd and I are. I'm proud. Enjoy it while it lasts. That's what my dad used to tell me back in the day. But Lloyd is a certified financial planner with Ameriprise Financial Services. So we're going to look today to tackle, from David's perspective, banking and lending and from that side of things. And then with Lloyd, we're going to look at the investment side and what can we do as consumers in light of what's going on. So let me throw it to you first, David, if you would, a little bit about background on you and what brought you to Piedmont Federal Savings Bank.
Very good. Thank you, Randy and Teddy. It's good to be with you, and Lloyd, it's good to be with you as well. I'm David Barksdale. I'm with Piedmont Federal Savings Bank. I've been a community banker all of my professional career. Graduated here in Winston Salem from Wake Forest way back when I had hair, and been in the community banking space ever since. I had the good fortune of joining Piedmont Federal about 3.5 years ago. We're a 120-year-old mutual, which means we're owned by our depositors. We do not have shareholders that's in the mortgage business. We've been in the mortgage business for these past 120 years. About 3 years ago, we also got into the commercial side of the house, making small business loans. and full depository services. I had a full head of hair before the financial crisis of 2007, and what that didn't take out, this last wrath of bank failures took the rest of it. But it's great to be here, and it's great to be part of the Winston-Salem community and economy, and I look forward to a great discussion.
Good deal. How about Lloyd, your background?
Yeah, so born and raised here in Winston, graduated from Duke University in '86, and I actually embarked in a banking career as well. I went with First Union. It was the growth phase of all the regional banks, and I worked on the retail side in Raleigh. And then in 1994, I moved back to Winston-Salem. My father, God bless him, he was a 50-year veteran of Merrill Lynch. So I learned a lot from my father in the business, and coming up on 30 years here. And I guess in 2005, I got my certified financial planner designation, and I sit on a team. So I have two partners on the team, and kind of full disclosure, anything I share today, this is not endorsed by Ameriprise, my firm. Yeah. I read a lot, 30 years of experience, learned from my dad, but my team, when I say we think, it's Brett Moyer and Cameron West, who are two wonderful partners. And we run an outfit called West Highlands Capital, but we operate under the Ameriprise umbrella. So.
Gotcha. I always ask the why question. Let's hit on that real quick. What got you started in the career path that really ignites that flame that drives you every day? Every guest we've ever had, we've always asked this question, and it's always interesting to understand kind of behind the scenes. What was the why that got you started where you go right now? David, what's your why?
When I was in college, I collected past due Visa cards for what was then NCNB. We know it now as Bank of America. And it sounds like a horrible job, but I really had a wonderful time. I worked the 60-day plus past dues and skip tracing, which means you can't find somebody, you go try to find them. And I really enjoyed my time there. And when I was graduating from college, I was a math major, and there were certain interviews set up just for the business majors or the accounting majors. And I wasn't. So I was, am I going to go into banking? Am I going to go sell toilets with Ferguson Enterprises, which was a huge interviewer on the campus? And I decided I didn't know much about toilets. So I decided to go into to banking, thinking, well, I'll go into banking and kind of figure out where I want to go next. And I got in there and I loved it. And I've been, as I said, I've been in community banking ever since. I like the community banking space, which we'll loosely define as assets less than 10 billion, which are most of the bank numbers out there, community banks. In that you get a working relationship with your client, whether that be the small business owner or the consumer, you get that working relationship. And it just has been something that I've really enjoyed. I took 2 years and worked for Wake Forest as a fundraiser, but the lure of banking called me back in, and have been here ever since. And it's been a great run. And I point back to collecting past due Visa cards over in a building that's no longer even there in Greensboro for NCM. Best bank in the neighborhood. Tagline.
That's how you start. How about you, Lloyd? What's your why?
My why, I think I was 10 or 12 when I bought my first stock, and my dad was with Merrill Lynch. And so he said, Lloyd, I want you to choose these stocks. And it was a company called American Credit Corporation, which I invested some money in it, not a ton. And then Wachovia came in and bought them. And so I learned investing at an early age. And obviously my father being in the industry, it was an easy parlay for me to come in. But it's funny, David mentioned that I interviewed with Ferguson Enterprises too. And now they've diversified. It's not just toilet, it's the whole shaboot. And so, I like to help people, and if you sit down with somebody who's got a complex situation, and you could do a financial plan, and you can chart out the next 10 years of their life, and maybe show them that they can retire earlier than they thought, you really can affect people's lives. You can change people's lives. And so my team does a great job with financial planning. And that's kind of what keeps me doing it, because I just love people. And I knew I was going into some kind of sales industry, but because of my personality, but that's kind of how I got to where I am now. And Ameriprise is very much a financial planning firm. And so it was the perfect fit. So I've been here over a decade.
Got you. And if you have comments or questions for our guest, again, a reminder, put them in the chat box. Teddy is Johnny on the spot with that. He'll work them in where appropriate. So let's dive in. There's a whole list of topics we can cover. And I made some notes, Teddy, so I am prepared. Let's
Wait a
let's
minute, let's see
tackle
your
this.
notes,
Yeah,
Randy. What color tablet or pad are you using today? Still a white
Right
pad
here.
guy, huh?
yeah. Now I can diversify. Lloyd's all about diversification, right? When it comes to assets, I've got blue and black ink, so I could, depending on my
I am
mood of
proud
the
of you,
moment.
big guy. Proud of you.
Yeah, well, there's that. All right, so let's tackle this thing. Interest rates higher than, for some of us, higher than we've known in our lifetime if we're fairly young. So what's this with the Federal Reserve and where interest rates are growing due to inflation? Now, let's tackle it from both of your perspectives, and whoever wants to go first, dive in and let's have at it.
Go ahead, David, if you want to jump in.
Sure. We deal with interest rates every day.
Yeah.
And I'll talk really about the two areas, the short end of the rate curve, which is your short-term interest rates. We'll call those less than 2-year interest rates. And then the long end of the curve, which we'll say are the 10-year treasuries and beyond. The Fed, really has just a very few instruments by which to seek their dual mandate. They have a dual mandate to maximize employment and price stability. So price stability is inflation and controlling inflation. And during the pandemic, they took rates to zero. They took the interest rates to zero, where they had been since the Great Recession, except for a period of about 1 year where they had started to raise interest rates up. And low rates for long periods of time is usually not friendly for banks. You do need some kind of slope to the yield curve, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So they took rates to zero, and then inflation, with all of this stimulus money, inflation started to creep into the economy. And the Fed said, well, this is transitory, which means it's really just caused by the supply chain bottlenecks and COVID, and we're going to come out of this. It's not long-term inflation. And they were wrong. And what happened was they got behind.
Well, David, how did they reach that conclusion in the first place? Because my first thought was that doesn't make sense. I mean, it's only part of the picture, but not the whole part. I mean, dollars chasing fewer goods.
Yeah.
But they felt it, and I'm not sitting on the Fed board of governors, but the data, they're very data dependent. The data they were saying was that the bulk of this price increase was caused by not being able to get the goods in. And once we released the bottleneck of goods, prices were going to settle back down, and they didn't. And so then last March, they began an aggressive, and they only control the short end of the curve, the Fed funds rate. And they started raising rates. They've raised the rates 500 basis points over the last year, which is the steepest rise in rates that we've seen in 50 years or so. So basically, certainly in my career, if not lifetime. And what that is doing is that's driving the short end up, the short end of the curve. So we're paying more as a bank. We're paying more for deposits. As a consumer, you're able to invest in short-term investments, and Lloyd can speak to that, and get higher interest rates. Rarely have banks competed with treasuries, people buying treasury bills for deposits, but that's where we find ourselves now. You look at the long end of the curve, the 10-year and beyond, that's where we set mortgage rates. And while those are up, they are still below the short end, which we call an inverted yield curve. Short rates are higher than long rates. And that really is not friendly for banks. But you got the 10-year rate that has risen over the last last 5-6 years. And so you're seeing mortgage rates at what many call an all-time high. Now, for those of us that don't have hair on this podcast, we remember our first house, and we bought it in the 10-11% range. Today, rates are somewhere in the sixes, and that is certainly the highest we've seen since the Great Recession, but it's not the highest we've seen in history. In fact, I'm not sure that's not somewhat of a normal rate. But that's what's going on with rates. The Fed is going to get inflation under control. They've stated that. They're likely going to pause at their next meeting in June. But we believe that they'll raise it at least 25 more basis points, at least one more, if not two more increases this year, because long-term inflation has a worse effect on the economy than the short-term effects, which may be a recession.
Right.
When you say basis, when you say basis points, is that what 0.25%?
Yeah. So if they raise it from 4% to 4.25%, that's 25 basis points. So a basis point is a 1/100th of a percentage point. So going from 4 to 4.25 is 25 basis points. And I apologize for getting into banking lingo, but 500 basis points means it went from Fed funds went from 0 to 5. And that is a huge increase.
Todd Porter just shared with us that he bought his first house in 1983 when rates were 16%.
Yeah.
And I remember back in a time early or late 1970s when interest rates were also at the 16%. They were pretty ugly. 80, 81, 82 was a horrible time to buy a new house.
Early 80s. Prime was in the 20% range in the early 80s.
Yeah, I think back, I think we're talking what, mid 70s or so, the oil embargo and that it seemed like interest rates were pretty high. So this stuff is cyclical, but again, a lot of us are accustomed to very low mortgage rates, and we see these things have doubled or tripled in some cases. So we're wondering what's going on. So Lloyd, you're up next to bat. So what's it from your perspective?
I'm just going to give some color. So the 2-year Treasury is around 4.4%.
Mm-hmm.
The 10-year Treasury is around 3.75. So since, as he mentioned, you've got the short end taller than the long end where mortgage rates are set. And there's a lot of, and I don't know if this is true, there was a lot of speculation that Chairman Powell did not raise rates because he wanted to be reappointed as Fed chairman. That's the word on Wall Street, and he didn't want to rock the apple cart, but clearly he should have been raising rates in 2021 and would have prevented this. This is very preventable. And then, of course, our friends in Congress had to pour $5 trillion into the economy, into bailouts and all that. So the combination's like the perfect storm that created this inflation mess. And it's going to take him longer. They're going to be higher than they are, than the market's expecting rate cuts this year. I don't think that's going to happen. They call it the Fed put, which over the last decade, anytime the markets got in turmoil, the Fed cut rates and brought the stock market back up. But with inflation being, as David mentioned, much more detrimental, they're not. They're going to keep rates longer for higher for longer. And, we're just going to have to put up with the effects of that. And I'll tag team. I bought my first house in Raleigh in 89, and my mortgage rate was 6.5%. So we're kind of where we were in 1989. And, I don't think that's going to really kill housing. I think people just have to adjust to the new norm. And because we had bull markets in real estate with rates in the 6.5%, 7.5% range. So I don't think housing's in trouble, or I think people will just have to adjust their expectations.
I concur. We've seen housing prices are continuing to be strong. We've seen new home sales. I read a report this morning, new home sales are up. But right out of college, I'm not sure you're going to be able to afford the 4,000 square foot home with the built-in sauna and steam room and the backyard pool. It's going to be an adjustment because the cost to carry that debt, as you said, Randy, is going to be 2 or 3 times more. And that's just the interest part. It's not the principal part, but the interest part to carry that debt is not going to be 2.5% as it was several years ago. It's going to be 6%. And there's no such thing as the new normal. But I do believe that folks that are looking for housing for the next 3 years, Lloyd, would probably need to be thinking in the 6% range on that rate, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I hear you gentlemen right, these parents who have these college kids, they want them out of their freaking home because they want an empty nest. It might cost them 2% of their mortgage for them to subsidize that interest rate. That might be okay.
Or it might cost them a little bit on their mortgage, which I've got. I understand that predicament. It might cost them a little bit of subsidy, or they've got to get their children's mindset such that instead of a 3,000 square foot house, they're going into one that may be smaller than the apartment they lived in college.
Wasn't it, Teddy? Was it John Lauder we had on the show months ago with the apartment? We're talking home and apartment now because the construction had lagged behind for years and years. There just was not enough inventory of homes or apartments, what have you. And so I don't know that we've caught up. I think we're working toward that. But the supply and demand issue, if there are enough houses out there, will that impact, I guess, the house pricing? It won't affect the interest rates as much, I wouldn't think, but the overall price of housing, do you see that leveling off, or where do you see that headed?
You're right. The supply and demand is going to affect the house price. It's not going to affect interest rates per se, although everything affects everything else eventually. Yeah. So supply and demand are going to affect the price of houses. We still are housing units short. We're apartment units short. They're building some in downtown right across. I live downtown Winston. They're building some right across the street from me. They've taken a pause on some other ones coming out of the ground, but there has been a lot of apartment buildings going on, apartment building projects that have been going on over the last several years. I do believe that supply and demand are going to affect the price of housing, but not necessarily interest rates. You know, to predict what a price of a house is going to be 1 year from now, well, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I knew that answer. I have no idea. I don't know what they're going to be next week.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and add in there too, is that the existing homes out there there's no inventory, because people think about it, they got their 3% mortgage. They don't want to let go of that house. But what we're starting to see is more building of houses. In the last 20, 25 years, they've been building bigger and bigger and bigger houses. They're starting to shift that back down now. So, you know, the good news is we got a long way to go to catch up to where we need to be in terms of the inventory and all that. But we're starting to see builders, you know, the last couple of months in particular have been building houses and building them smaller so they're more affordable. So I think that's a positive that we're starting to make some progress. We got a long way to go till housing's at a perfect equilibrium.
Yeah. David,
you know, to your point about the 2.5% rates that are out there and folks aren't willing to get to it, you know, this is going to have an effect on our local lives. I was talking to one of our city council members yesterday, and as you know, we're interviewing for a new city manager, and that city manager may come from a city outside of Winston-Salem. Maybe they're in Winston, but they've got to live within the jurisdiction of the county or the city. There's a high likelihood that person's going to be giving up a 2.5–3% interest rate to come and jump into the pool of a 6–6.5% interest rate. And how does that look? And how does that play into the availability of candidates? And it just has an effect if you're giving up that 2.5% rate, which I'm in the 2 range, and I don't plan on refinancing mine anytime soon.
Nope.
Teddy, I don't know if you want to work in.
Yeah, let me pull this up. So Mike dropped in here. I'm going to simplify it. He says, I'm 6 years away from retirement. Should I be throwing money? And I know you're not here to give financial advice, so I got that. But in a general discussion, how does someone need to think? Is that the right way to position this? How does someone need to think in the context of, I'm 6 years away from retirement? Should I be throwing money in a 401k, or should I be throwing it into a home? How do they need to think that through? David, I'm with you. Smile, man. I know you guys can't give advice.
Well, Lloyd, I'm going to get Lloyd to jump on this one first, just because, I mean, it's,
you know,
because
I was just going to say, everybody's situation's different. You know, I'm a huge believer in saving money, and a 401k is a great way to put in pre-tax contributions, but I would be remiss if I didn't say all 401k now have a Roth option that if you have done everything pre-tax, you ought to look at putting after-tax dollars in that are going to grow tax-free. So I'll put that in there, but you can never go wrong saving money. Now, what they may do is they may take their foot off the gas pedal a little bit with their portfolio. They don't need to be 100% stocks. They you know, particularly speculative stocks, but you know, depending on their age and whatnot, most of my clients are going to own stocks until the day they die, because that's where you outperform inflation, where fixed income tends to perform in line with inflation, maybe a little bit better, but it protects your downside. So, you know, that's kind of my thoughts. Save as much as you can over the next 6 years. And the other thing is they've increased the limits that you can put in there, catch-up provisions, Secure Act 2.0. So I would put in some money and really think about the Roth option. That's off the top of my head.
Yeah, David.
I think if it was my money, and I only speak for me, I'd probably put as much in the 401k as I could. You know, housing right now is expensive. So if you're going to go into housing, you're going to pay up for the price of the house. You're going to pay up for your mortgage. The 401k being 6-7 years from retirement, I think that is a very good option. Yeah. Plus, you know, there is some benefit to living in an apartment and calling them up and telling them to come change your air conditioning filter or light bulbs out, and as you know, home maintenance can also get expensive depending on the type of home you buy.
Yeah.
Might buy 2 cents worth, which is worth
both of you have talked this already, so I'm not sure how much more we want to talk about it, but I do want to review it just so everybody's understanding that's watching this. You talk about an inverted yield curve and its effect on the economy and housing. Anybody want to tackle that? Again, make this in simple terms so that Teddy can understand it.
Thank you.
See, Teddy, there you go.
I'll tell you the effect it has on banks, and it leads some into what went on with Silicon Valley and some of the others. And that is interest rates are a reflection of risk and time.
Well, first of all, what is this inverted yield curve? What is that? How would you define that?
It affects interest rates, and interest rates are a reflection of risk and time. And usually the longer you tie up your money, the higher your interest rate is going to be. So if you put your money into a 10-year treasury note, you're going to get paid a higher rate than if you put it in a 2-year treasury note, because over time, the present value of that dollar is greater you're going to get paid more over 10 years because you're tying it up for that period of time. I hope I'm directionally accurate, Lloyd, than a 2-year. And currently the market is saying, nope, 2-year rates are going to be higher than 10-year. What does that do for a bank? That means most of our deposit costs are tied to the short end of the curve, the 2-year and under. That's our raw fuel. That's our deposit cost. And so we're having to pay up for deposits, which is why you're seeing CD specials run in every Sunday newspaper that usually have a 4-point something on them. And then if on the other side, on our loans or the loans that you take out, if you take out a mortgage, they're priced on the long end of the curve, on the 10-year. And so we've got these assets. And Silicon Valley, one of the banks that failed, had assets that were long in nature, meaning lower rates than they're currently having to pay for their depositors. And that an inverted yield curve is not sustainable over the long term. It happens, but it is not sustainable for our economy and for our banking industry over the long term.
And and I'll check in too that it's always been a red flashing light that a recession is imminent. And what it does, again, the Fed's trying to slow down the economy, slow down inflation. And one way to do it is think about if you're a bank and you're paying 4% on deposits, but you're lending money out at less than that, you're losing money. So what it does is the lending is drying up. You're not getting many loans for businesses to grow. And so it's just another way of the Fed slowing down the economy to try to get inflation under control.
We call that a credit crunch, and they've been asking us through the senior loan officer survey, is there a credit crunch happening? And we are starting to see a slowdown both in borrowing and in lending, which, as Lloyd said, will slow the economy down, which is good for the Fed, which means inflation comes down, which means they don't have to keep raising interest rates.
Exactly.
But it hurts the small business owner in the meantime if we're not willing to lend money. It's a catch.
Hurts the real estate industry, hurts the automotive industry. So
do banks get together, or internally just say, look, we have to raise the bar in terms of who can qualify for loans? How do you scale back loaning out money legally? How does that operate?
Usually that's done on the business side of lending that doesn't have the regulatory restrictions that consumer side. On our mortgage, we do not risk-based priced. So if someone with an 800 credit score comes in to borrow 100,000, they're going to get the same price as someone with a 680 credit score comes in. We don't risk-based price our loans. On the business side, you can make a statement that says, you know what, we're not loaning anyone that's not a current client. And you have full right and authority to do that. That's how you slow it down. You just, from a regulatory standpoint, you can do that. Say, we're not making loans to businesses that aren't current clients. That puts the brakes on expansion.
And then that starts this whole other ripple of a business can't thrive, a business can't survive, a business has to cut back, people lose their jobs, and all that other stuff.
Yeah. Hey, Teddy, we're halfway through. If you want to take a 30 break, and then we'll resume. Yeah.
I love this conversation. I'm learning something new every time we show up. Hey, you're on Lunch Conversations with Randy and Teddy. And those who've never met me, I'm Teddy Burriss. I'm trying to get my talking points in front of me. I got them right here. Our sponsor for our show is Blackwell Captive Solutions. Randy and I have known Carrie and her team for many years. Their experience is in health insurance business for small businesses who are self-insured. Their medical stop loss captive is easy to implement and works like a shock absorber against those high dollar claims that your employees may have to have. So if you are self-employed for your healthcare insurance for your employees, reach out to blackwellcaptive.com and have a conversation with them and let them know that Teddy told you to come say hi to them. Back to you, buddy.
Good deal. We're getting a crash course today in
Don't use that
finance.
word, Randy. Don't use that word crash.
Crash.
That's bad.
We're being educated. We're being enlightened on the state of the economy, interest rates, inflation, all kinds of stuff. And I can't speak for Teddy, but I'm certainly not a finance guy. So a lot of this stuff it's fascinating and interesting, but it's not stuff that I necessarily knew coming into today's conversation. So I appreciate you sharing it from both perspectives. We have David Barksdale. He's the CEO at Piedmont Federal Savings Bank. He's the one with the same hairstyle as mine. And Lloyd Barnhardt.
Much more hair.
Much more hair, certified financial planner with Ameriprise Financial Services. So David talks from the banking lending side and how that is impacted by what's going on. And then Lloyd talks more so from the what I'll call the investment side. And again, different perspectives. But so we're eyeing the same putt, but from different angles. And so let's dive into this bank failure stuff. I mean, unless you lived under a rock in the last few months, you've heard that banks are failing. And what's that? How did that happen? What's it impact? How's it going to impact me, the economy, the whole deal? So dive in, however you want to take that. David, you want to tee this one up and start it?
Sure. And to cover all that happened with three bank failures, there have been three, and a fourth, Silvergate decided to shut in an orderly liquidation process. So we'll call them four banks that have closed their doors. And we're probably going to have to extend this all the way through the supper hour to get a full flavor for this. I'll try to pull it down.
Teddy doesn't pay me overtime. So look, when this clock hits 1 o'clock, I'm done. Unless Teddy opens up the purse strings a little. So just so you know, just I'm sorry. I had to throw that in. You knew that, Teddy.
We'll focus on Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon was the first one to go down. And what happened was a lot of things, first of all, happened. Mm-hmm. One of which was this inverted yield curve. They had all this cash that came into their bank through the stimulus money and through their customers. They invested that in long-term treasuries. These are treasuries. There's no credit risk in these instruments that they invested in, but they went out long, meaning 10 years or beyond in these instruments. Deposit rates started going up. Their customers, their clients needed those funds to run their business because the IPO market, the initial public offering market, which they were lending into that, started to dry up. And so their customers needed that liquidity. Well, if a customer comes in, it's an old-fashioned bank run, except it's newfangled. If folks want their money and they need their deposits back out, the bank has to give them cash through their assets. Well, their assets were tied up for 10 years and they had taken a hit, and to sell those assets, it was going to cost them money because of mark-to-market accounting, which is something we're not going to get into today. But they were going to take a big hit to liquidate these long-term safe treasuries to pay their depositors back. And then with a click of a button, a run starts on a bank. Mm-hmm. And once that run started, there was no stopping it. They lost $40 billion or so in a 24-hour period. And there were a lot of things that went wrong, but one of them was this inverted yield curve and the way they invested their money. Now, I want to make one point on this, and that is, we're going to bail them out through the FDIC, but the taxpayer won't have to pay. That's the word we heard from Washington. The taxpayer won't have to pay. I'm going to tell you that is incorrect. Number one, banks have to pay. Banks have to pay for this, and we are taxpayers. So I'm glad to know I'm not a taxpayer anymore. But we're taxpayers. We're going to have to pay for it. The other piece is that the FDIC insurance fund, which is covering the cost of this, is going to take about a $23 billion hit. That's got to be reimbursed. It's going to be reimbursed through assessments on the banks. banks are going to pass that cost along. So while Randy Wooden and Teddy Burriss won't directly write a check to the federal government to help pay for this, in the end, the taxpayers, as in all things that happen that the government gets involved, the taxpayers will ultimately have to figure out a way to pay this back. Now, I do think this is not a large hit to the FDIC insurance fund. We'll be able to recover from it. There's a lot of political and financial ramifications that went in to the regulators stepping in and guaranteeing these deposits. But I think they did the right thing at that time to try to control this contagion. But in the end, it's going to create more regulation, and banks are going to have to step up via their clients and reimburse this insurance fund. Yeah. Lloyd, I think I'm directionally accurate on that. But
you are absolutely on. And the only thing I would add is that there was mismanagement, because typically, sure, if you have a long bond portfolio, what you want to do is hedge against interest rate risk. So you can buy hedges as an institution, and they hadn't even had a risk control officer in like a year. And clearly they didn't do that. So there's incompetence with the management. And also all these different banks that failed kind of had niche client bases, meaning either cryptocurrency or they were in, the Silicon Valley, high tech. And then when something went wrong there, they needed their money. And then the whole banking industry is built on confidence. And then when the word got out that there's a problem, boy, it just exploded. So it was a combination of management not doing their job, as well as the interest rate environment, and then everybody got spooked, and that's all she wrote.
Yeah.
What about mismanagement? Mismanagement by the bank, inverted yield curve, lack of
trust.
Say lack of oversight by regulators. They had oversight, but they didn't enforce what they found.
Oh,
right. I've read that too.
Yeah.
What about back? I forget the year exactly. I'm going to make it up. It was 2009 or whatever, when we had a whole litany of things going on, and the banking industry, bad loans, foreclosure, whatever, all kinds of stuff going on. And the talk then was, we're going to fix this so this doesn't happen again. And I'm not sure it's the exact same problem, but here we are again, 8, 9, however many years, whatever, 15 years later, and we're still having this discussion about banks that are screwing up.
Randy, we'll do the math for you, Randy.
Yeah, like you said, I don't have the math formula here.
He was close.
It's interesting. The 15? OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, who is our main regulator, the OCC was in our office this morning having an educational session for a group of our bankers. We're not under an exam or anything like that.
Yeah.
And the crisis we had back in 2007, 8, 9 was a credit crisis. This is not a credit crisis. And in fact, many of the regulators said we'll never have an interest rate risk crisis. And that's exactly what we have right now. Yeah. We have something going on with interest rates, inverted yield curve being part of it. And it's an earnings crisis. It's not a credit crisis. Credit's still clean. It's really not a liquidity crisis, because we now have the Fed created this bank term funding program that banks can borrow. So we now have the liquidity that wasn't in place when Silicon Valley failed. But now it's an earnings crisis, and everybody's earnings are getting hurt, and people are short selling the stock, so that when earnings get hurt, stock price goes down. People make money when stock price goes down, and you get this swirling going on.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what's happened on banks getting just crushed through this recent 12 months.
That's why I'm glad I have my money in a mattress. So
and Randy went out and bought himself a California King so get more in there.
It's safe in your community banks, Randy. It's safe in all.
Lloyd, do you want to chime in on that one? Anything from your perspective?
Say it was human nature is that if things are like 08, interest rates have been basically zero, as David pointed out, except for like a year in there. People got comfortable with this is going to be forever. It's going to be into the foreseeable future. And obviously that was wrong. And, they made mistakes. They got caught with their pants down. But again, I'm you can look at Truist stock. Their stock's been cut in half because of all this stuff over with these other banks. Truist is a very safe bank, well-diversified customer base, good risk management. But the fallout has been across the board. All the banks have been hit pretty hard, with the exception of First Citizens Bank in Raleigh, which bought the assets. I can't remember if it was Signature Bank. Yeah, Silicon Valley, their stock's over 1,300, so they've gone the opposite direction. But overall, it's hurt the banks, the confidence, and with an inverted yield curve, their earnings aren't looking great for the foreseeable future. So there's better places probably to have your money if you're adding new money.
I don't know, anything in the chat area, Teddy, you want to tackle if there is,
a little diversion back to homes, and the questions addressed to Lloyd, and who, by the way, this guy asked this question, is a 20-year Ameriprise client, and he wants to know, are you seeing your Gen X clients feeling that they don't want to own a home, they're absolutely happy to go rent for the rest of their lives?
You know, we have a fairly mature client base, so I can't say we have a lot of Gen Xers, but everything that I've read, you know, I'm a Rotarian. I love being committed to an organization and doing service. This generation does not like to be tied down. They do not like to be tied up in clubs, commitments. They like apartments. They want a 1-year lease. They want to be able to move, you know, so they're wired differently than obviously the later generations. You know, I'm at the end of the baby boomers and whatnot. So clearly, yeah, they're not crazy about buying a house and being tied down.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we're going to have some time still. I'd like to get your take on the recession. And so I'll just throw it out there now and think about it for a second. But, you know, are we there in a recession yet? When is it going to hit? How severe? That kind of thing. But another point that you guys had mentioned was, how do the younger generations, and not necessarily Gen X, but I'm talking Gen Z. So we're talking the young kiddos out there, that generation, how are they going to save money for housing and retirement? What are some of their obstacles, and what are the tea leaves looking like for them as they try to start out with their career?
And just so I can put balance to Randy's questions, I know that you two guys do not use tea leaves.
The tea leaves of its palm.
I think it comes down to the parents to teach them good saving behavior. You know, if they're working a summer job and they're making $1,000, have them save at least 10%, if not more, and put it into an investment and continue to add to it in their jobs. And then as they see success in that and the market's rewarding them, they'll do more. But I just don't think we're certainly not teaching it in school. I think that should be a criteria, but the parents, it's their responsibility to teach their kids to be responsible with money and start saving early. And, you know, I've got a lot of clients that their kids have Roth IRAs and they're putting money in from summer jobs and all that kind of stuff, which I think is great to teach them the value of investing. And, you know, you got to start early and do it as long as you can.
Yeah, David.
The price of homes is eventually going to find an equilibrium. They have bounced around a lot through this, through the pandemic and then post-pandemic. It will find an equilibrium. As someone who's a parent of an Xer and a millennium, I sure hope they find a house at some point. I mean, I love my children, but don't want to enter retirement age with them under roof. You know, I echo what Lloyd said, which is, you know, how do you educate them? How do you save? And I think it's a combination of saving for retirement while also saving for that first house and being able to put down, and you may have to be able to put down 10%. You know, there's several good first-time home buyer programs out there that allow you to finance part of your down payment. There's even some first-time dream buyer programs that allow you to finance 100% of the home depending on your income level. And so I think folks have to really shop around and make sure they find something that is reasonable and understand that the rate is not going to be 2.5%. The rate's going to be 6%, and do the financial planning. How much do I have to save to get there? And then you know, many folks maybe are in foster care. They don't have a single parent. They're not getting a financial education. Schools have got to step in. Banks have got to step in. Financial planners have got to step in and provide this education of how we save for a home. I don't think it's out of reach. I think it's going to be different. But I kind of have some hope that it's not out of reach.
Yeah,
good point. I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So Donald asked this question. He positioned a question about, you know, banks offering to pay him 0.1% on his money that's there, but they slam him with 26% on credit cards when he uses a credit card. He's had for 10 years and credit history is great. And he leads to this question. What do you think about this rush to gold? Is there a rush to gold? Do you see that? And what are your thoughts about that discussion?
Well, gold traditionally has been a horrible investment. I mean, if you look at it historically, it may have kept up with inflation. Now it's surging right now because look at what's on our plate. We got, Congress in a standoff with the president over this. We got earnings in the market that are deteriorating. We don't know when the interest rates are going to stop hiking. Got the bank situation. So that's kind of my thought on that.
So gold surging because of the demand.
Yeah, it is. It's supply
and that demand will drop.
It doesn't pay any income. It doesn't pay any income, but it does have inherent value. And I've got clients that, there's nothing wrong with having some real gold just in case, something terrible happened. But again, historically hadn't been a great investment. And, it's obviously had a good run because there's so much on our plate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything, David, you want to add? I've got a couple other topics I want to tackle here before we break.
Sure. And I understand where he's coming from, where Donald's coming from. I don't see a rush to gold right now. We've been in a zero interest rate environment, and so rates on your savings account, on your CDs have been historically low. They're not that anymore. They are coming up. Credit cards have always been at a higher interest rate. There are laws in place that I know we couldn't take we don't have credit cards, but we couldn't take them to 26%. But credit cards are the highest interest rate out there. And I encourage folks to use a credit card if you're going to pay it off each month. If you need to go make a big dollar purchase and you're going to be able to pay it off in a month or two, but it's certainly not the solution for long-term financing of buying a house, buying a car, putting a deck on your house, sending your kid to college. That's longer-term financing and will carry a lower interest rate than that. Yes, banks are going to make money because they're going to pay you less for your deposit than they're going to charge you for your loan. That's the business model. Right now, it's interesting that that's really not the case, but long-term, that is the business model. But I certainly feel your pain, Donald, at least understand it. And I'm hoping that, in the long term, these things are going to level back out and you'll be able to earn a decent rate. We call it 363 banking, and we'll never see these days again. And that's, we pay 3% for your deposits. We loan it out at 6%. And we're on the golf course by 3%. I play golf, so I can use that. But I think the 363 model is gone. But I do think you'll start to see it get back a little bit more to that equilibrium.
Gotcha. Hey, two big topics I want to tackle ideally before we close it out today. One is debt ceiling stuff, and you've got the administration and two parties, fighting for what I'll call winning the war of opinion in the media. But behind the scenes, there's some serious lifting that's got to happen here. What's really going on, and what are the ramifications if this thing doesn't get off the ground?
Well, we got burned in 2011 when they kind of broached the ceiling, and we're still paying we got downgraded our credit rating in the United States. We're still paying a higher rate than we would have if we had not done that. So I think everybody knows the ramifications and the potential fallout if they don't get this done. So Wall Street has been pretty much saying they're going to get it done. It's going to be at the 11th hour, but they're going to get it done. But I can see today we're off 300 points. As we get closer to June 1st, you could see the market sell off, it out of fear that they're not going to come to any kind of agreement. But I think they will. I would be shocked if they didn't. But, the market's starting to say, uh-oh, it's getting close.
Yeah, David.
We find ourselves that anytime there's a different party in one of the houses of Congress and the White House, the debt ceiling gets held hostage.
Yep.
And it's used as a negotiating tool, in this case, for budget and spending. And that's usually what it's tied to.
Sure.
We got to get through this crisis. I do believe we will. Our own representative, Patrick McHenry, is in the heat of negotiations. I hope they get it resolved. And then I hope they figure out a way to take debt ceiling discussions out of the political trade-offs that happen. I don't know if we'll ever see that, but boy, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan has got a war room set up. We don't have a war room. We don't have space to have a war room, but I don't know what the ramifications are, but I do know this: they are not good, and we do not want this to happen.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. And I think that's something we can all agree on. And then it's just the old devil in the details, I guess. That's to be determined. And so if just as a quick thought here, Lloyd, if people start selling off toward the end of the month, and I've got a few extra coins because Teddy gave me a raise, maybe I should start investing in some of these things because the prices are down.
You're
Pork
exactly
bellies,
right.
Randy, pork
You're
bellies.
exactly right. I mean,
Plastics.
the market, plastics, great movie. You're exactly right. I think it's a buying opportunity as long as you have a kind of a 3 to 5 year window. You know, I've had a lot of people buy, Truist Financial, and I'm not recommending it, but it's probably a 3 to 4 year play. When things calm down, they're paying a high dividend, it'll get back to normal. But I'm always a big fan, and I'm sitting on a ton of cash right now looking for an entry opportunity. So, that's
We'll
kind of what
talk,
I'm
Lloyd.
looking for.
Randy and I will talk with you. We need more sponsors for the show. Thank you for
Not me personally, my clients have a lot of cash.
Well, and I'm also thinking too, we've seen all this cryptocurrency and a lot of the high tech stuff kind of just, so I'm thinking maybe utilities, healthcare, more stable investments.
Yeah,
maybe
let me talk about that for a second, because really since 2008 we've had zero interest rates. When what we found is when you have zero interest rates, risk-free money is at 0.5% or 1%. It spurs speculation. So that's one of the reasons why over the last 10 years tech stocks have gone nuts, cryptocurrency, all that stuff. Now we got a 5%. I can get a 5% CD on the market. So suddenly your risk-free return is 5%, and that's a higher bar to get over. So all the tech stocks, the growth stocks, and all those that have just killed it, doubled value stocks over the last decade. I think, and my team thinks, we're in a paradigm shift, that moving forward, people are going to want real productive assets. And they're things like energy and industrials and things that have lower PEs, meaning the price to earnings multiple, and they also pay a dividend. Dividend is key. And over the last decade, dividends accounted for about 10% of your return. Historically, it's been about 40% of your return. So my team thinks that we're heading into back of a more traditional environment. Everybody wants to hang on to their Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, but we think you're better served with dividend-paying stocks, defensive industry. You mentioned a couple: healthcare, consumer staples, toilet paper, and utilities. There's a lot of opportunities out there, and I love energy as well. So, I think most people are reluctant when something's done so well for so long to give it up. It's going to take time, but that's kind of where I think the markets are going for the next 5 to 10 years. It's going to be more of a traditional type of equity that's going to do well. And dividend is key. That's all we buy is dividend stocks. Some lower that are raising their dividends, and some that are higher, think utilities, things like that. And we're not out of this yet. We're in about a 14-month trading pattern. The market started going down last year and we've rallied there. So we're in a trading pattern right now. We're going to break out probably if and when that recession comes and we get on the other side of it, then, we'll have our normal bull market run. So the market's just trying to decipher where it's going, what the Fed's doing, what the debt ceiling, earnings look like. So that's kind of my preaching to the crowd. Focus on dividend stocks.
Got it, David? Yeah.
This dovetails back a little bit to some of the topics we're talking about, is how does the Gen X and the millennials and the Gen Zs buy a house and save for retirement. And over the last few years, signing up for a crypto account and getting a Coinbase wallet and starting to trade in Bitcoin and the other crypto, that sounds all fun, but that ought to be done just with house money. You first need to be putting away money for retirement, putting away money for rainy days, and putting away money for buying a house if that's the route you want to go. And everybody had a crypto account, and we've seen the effect of that. And that may be on your radar screen to invest in, but my suggestion would be do the other stuff first, and only play in the crypto market with money you can afford to lose, not money that you're investing for the down payment of your house or the education of your kids, or for your education, or whatever the case may be. You look at Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett and watch what they do.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Hey, we got about 5 minutes left. I want to get, I don't know, not a thumbs up, thumbs down thing, but just give me a real quick hit. Recession. Are we here yet? When is it happening? How severe? When it'll be done? Take it however you want to.
We could be here.
Yep.
I do think it's coming. If it's not already here, as you know, they don't call a recession until after it's happened, or after it's begun. I do think we'll have one. I do think it'll be mild and short-lived.
Mild, short-lived. Okay, good. Lloyd.
And I agree with that. And I'm certainly not an economist, but never before in our history have we shut down the economy, thrown $5 trillion out in basically pain medication, and the Fed's raised rates like this. And the stubborn things right now is the employment market is still strong. The consumer's still strong because they got all that money. And so, this is a weird, this is going to be in textbooks and business schools in 20 years looking at this. But I agree. I think it'll be a recession this year, and it'll be shallow because the consumers have money. They're in good shape. We don't have any major problems where people are going to cut back drastically. So I agree. It'll be a short and sweet recession, and we'll get out the other side, and a bull market will be born.
Yeah.
That's
So
it.
You just set Randy up. You just set Randy up to get through this short recession, because now he's going to know in 6 months from now, he's going to come ask me for that pay raise.
There you go.
Well, hey, if we have a recession, that usually means layoffs. And so now you're going to be faced with the same thing when COVID hit, potentially. So I know we've only got a couple minutes left. Let's wrap this thing up if we could, and offer up a couple of takeaways each, a couple of things you'd like our folks to recall or remember based on our conversation today. David, let me start with you. A couple of takeaways.
Sure. And before I do, certainly want to thank you, Randy, and Teddy for having us on here, and for Blackwell Captive Solutions for being our sponsor today. Certainly appreciate them. A couple of takeaways is our local economy remains strong.
Okay.
And to a large degree, our national economy remains strong. I do believe these waters are choppy, and they're likely to remain choppy, or perhaps get even a little choppier over the next little bit. And as folks sit there with whatever disposable income they may have, they need to think wisely, set a little bit aside for retirement, set a little bit aside for the rainy day fund. And I'm in the housing and mortgage business. I'd be crazy if I didn't say set a little bit aside to go buy a house.
Yep.
That you're going to finance with a little bit of the right amount of debt.
Got you. How about you, Lloyd? What do you think?
Well, from an investment themes for this year and probably going into next year, we're preaching to our clients, play defense. This is not the time to play offense and be aggressive. And we talked about stocks. You can do that. Diversify geographically, because people have historically favored the United States, and it's been great for the last 10 years. But the third point is the world is changing. Accept that it's changing. Understand that we're going to go from more of a focus on growth to probably value and dividend stocks. So, own the international, 10, 15%. And I think you'll be successful for the short term and the long term.
Yeah. Good stuff.
I appreciate you guys coming on. David Barksdale. David's the Piedmont Federal Savings Bank CEO, and Lloyd Barnhardt is a certified financial planner with Ameriprise Financial Services. One thing I like, Teddy, is them talking about educating our youth and getting into the schools. I know there's some entities in our area that do that.
Yep.
And then also those who educate adults with consumer credit and some other issues, because I think financial education, certainly something I never had as a kid, or if it wasn't stressed, let's put it that way. Or maybe it was, I didn't pay any attention. Could have been all of the above.
Could have been all of the above. Yeah.
Could have been all of the above. Bottom line was, it was something that just went, and I'm still paying for this today. So I think if we can get to kids when they're younger and get them learning the right things, I think we'll be in good shape. How do you like that? Things, Teddy?
You did.
That's
good.
the end of my talk.
You did. Look, we
There
no
you go.
longer have piggy banks, dude.
Yeah, no, I
can't
broke
hold
mine.
nothing. You
I had
can't
to break
collect
it.
pennies,
Got it.
Even though I contend to my grandkids, that's my retirement scattered out all over the ground there, a penny at a time. Just gotta go find it all. So that's my sad. That's how I tell them I have no money. It's all scattered out. So, hey, David, good to see you again. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Lloyd, thanks a lot for showing up and helping us.
Pleasure.
Educating all of us. We really appreciate that. So, hey, the show is sponsored by Blackwell Captive Solutions. David, thanks for reminding us. Ownership, peace of mind, price stability. Blackwell Captive wants to help organizations do that, to manage their self-insured healthcare costs for their with their employees. Randy, good seeing you again, buddy. Let's get together again another day.
Remember our next week's guest. Yep.
I'll talk about it next week. Let me take that,
Okay.
since I've reminded myself with that conversation just now. So, hey, next week we have Tina Ketchy Stearns. Now, this is a conversation that's a part of a lot of topics we're bringing to the show, but Tina Ketchy Stearns is coming to the show. Tina works for hospice and palliative care. There's actually she works for a company that gets involved with hospice and palliative care and senior living and home health care. This is going to be an interesting conversation because I learned a lot about hospice and palliative care with Tina Ketchy Stearns next week, Wednesday, 11:55 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us. I can promise you'll learn something new.
Good deal. Thank you, Teddy.
Good to
Thanks,
see you
guys.
guys. Take care.
All right. Good day.
Bye.
Thank you.